The screen went away. We're giving everyone a few minutes, a couple minutes to get in. As I always take the moment while we wait. Please feel free to share where you're joining us from. I'm coming in from Plano, Texas. If they raise hand, can I help you? Okay. Wow, Germany, Thailand. Interesting story about Thailand. My daughter lived in Laos, LAOS, for 2 years, and she went to Thailand all the time. Bulgaria, Aggie country, A&M, Aggie, Aggie. I'm helping the ESL interpreter know what the heck I was saying. The numbers are still climbing. Do I want to give everyone a chance to get in? All righty. I'm going to start this. Thank you and welcome to the importance of creating accessibility policy and accessibility statement. I'm so glad we're going to have this topic because accessibility statements are one of the easier, quicker things you can do if you're just starting out with accessibility or making progress. And I've known one of the speakers, Jeff Adams, for a very long time, and he always had great things. I learn a lot from him. So, captions are available. Just select the icon on the bottom of your Zoom screen. The Zoom text, Emily will post them into the chat for you. American Sign Language obviously is being provided. Microphones are muted to prevent any background noise or disruption. And I will be watching the chat as well as the speakers. And if you have technical issues, just put it in the chat or let us know whatever way works for you. And then post your question into the Q&A. You can post them in the chat as I'll be watching it. If you put it in the Q&A, it will get lost in the chat. So whichever you prefer. All right, so I am going to hand the reign over to Michele and Jeff. Over to you.
There we go. Everybody should be able to see our screen now. So welcome to today's topic, the importance of creating accessibility policy and accessibility statement. As Meryl said, this is such a key component, having both of these available to both external and internal people. So we're excited to bring this to you today. As we get started, we'll introduce ourselves. And Michele, I'll hand it off to you to go first on that.
Thank you, Jeff, and welcome everybody. My name is Michele Lucchini. I'm the Vice President for Products at UsableNet, and my role in the organization is to oversee the strategic development of our products, making sure that we conduct initiatives that are meaningful based on the market requests, our clients' feedback, and the way our clients are implementing their digital accessibility programs. I've been working at UsableNet for 25 years. I started when UsableNet has born, and so I think I can say I dedicated pretty much my entire career to digital accessibility. And I'm the co-author, together with Jeff, of the book Content for Everyone, which is a guide for creative entrepreneurs to produce accessible and usable web content. I'm very glad to be on this webinar also because I really believe that even if somebody could consider that this topic is marginal, actually is probably the foundation of a digital accessibility maturity for all organizations. Jeff, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yes, thank you, Michele. I've been here half of UsableNet's existence, coming up on 14 years this year. And as part of my role as Vice President of Accessibility Operations, I'm working with our clients around the world. And one of my primary areas of focus is helping them integrate accessibility into their processes, which certainly an accessibility statement does that, as it's that external customer-facing view of accessibility, but then also the policies that drive their processes, how they're approaching accessibility, and making it clear to everyone what they have to do in accessibility. And another key area for me at UsableNet is working to build out our education program, doing webinars like this with IAAP, as well as the other programs that we offer through UsableNet. And as Michele mentioned, we co-wrote that Content for Everyone book as well. So taking a look at the agenda, it's a pretty simple agenda today. We're going to talk about accessibility policies first, which really dives into documenting accessibility expectations inside organizations. And then we're going to look at accessibility statements, which is all about documenting your accessibility work for your customers and for anyone who's visiting your website or your app. And then we're going to break that down into a few areas between the US standard statements that are available, the EU and EAA standard statements, as the European Accessibility Act actually goes into effect later this week, and then what EU standard can mean for US and non-EU organizations as well, and how to think about what statements you're putting out into the world. So first up, accessibility policies. And this really connects with how an organization is going to be looking at the processes that it's putting in place for its employees to think about accessibility. And your first question may be, why is this important to have? And it really not only presents the way and the reason why that an organization is acting on accessibility, which is important for everyone who's involved to understand, because accessibility does affect everyone throughout the company. It's not just something for development to take care of. It's not just something for design to take care of. It really is something that everyone who works on a digital property has to think about. And so at the same time, you need to put a policy around that so they actually know what their piece of that responsibility is. The policy actually goes into the sites and apps that are covered, the requirements that need to be followed, how all of this is going to get reported and who it's reported to, how often it's reported, things like that. It dives into the accountability plans, because if you don't have accountability attached to the policy, it can be very hard then to enforce the policy. And then organization to organization, there can be other key information that may get inserted into the policy as you go. And perhaps most importantly, it clarifies the roles of who is involved in accessibility and how existing roles will likely change. And for any organization who's just starting out, of course, it's going to bring a lot of change as individuals and teams have to start thinking about accessibility at the top of everything that they're doing and how it can really impact their final product to make sure it's accessible when they're finished with it. Now, I've talked about it being an internal policy by and large, but there are instances where that policy can become external as well. There can be legal and regulatory uses for this policy. It could be something that you share when you need to show proof that you actually have an accessibility program. That could be the outcome potentially for any kind of legal suit that gets put in. It could be part of a settlement agreement. And there could be instances on the regulatory side where you may need to prove something about what your policy is. And then there's working with vendors. Whether you're working with vendors who are providing you services like development work or design work or some other aspects of your web program, those vendors need to know what your expectations are. And it could even become, part of the contractual obligations that you have with that vendor to be able to meet your policy and your accessibility requirements. It can also be something that you share if you're getting third-party components, if you're working to contract chatbots or review widgets or cookie privacy policy banners or anything else that you're integrating third-party into your site. Being able to tell those vendors what your expectations are and making sure that they're up to those expectations can be very important to make sure all of those components you're bringing in are accessible and understanding what the vendor's responsibility is for that. So let's talk a little bit about what I would recommend to put into an accessibility policy. It starts with the mission statement, and that can be pulled from perhaps your own company's mission statement, broad mission statement, especially if there's things in that mission statement that tie to how the organization and what its commitment is to its customers. Because certainly as you're getting into accessibility, it's more than ticking a checkbox that you've done the WCAG work. It's more than ticking a legal requirement. It's about servicing your customers so they can get their information, they can get their products, they can get whatever they've come to your website or app for, and get there as equally, whether they are in the disabled community, whether they're not, whatever their needs are, they're met by your website. The mission statement can also go further into why you specifically want to do this accessibility work and why you need to do this work to meet your customers. So having that mission statement can be a strong indication to the entire organization why this is important to the organization as a whole, and that it does go further than any one team. The digital properties that are going to be involved in the statement should also be here as well. And this can be a really important spot depending on how many properties you're managing at once. You might be an organization that has a single website and a single application. And so, it becomes a very short list. But many organizations might have multiple websites because they handle multiple brands. There could be things that are, business to consumer, but also B2B that would need to be taken into account. So there could be a lot of properties to list out. And you want to keep these as kind of a living document. So you can list out properties that are being worked on currently, properties that have started to meet baseline conformance levels, and properties that are also coming later in the queue, because you can't necessarily work on everything at once either. You want to state the WCAG conformance level that these properties need to meet as a baseline. So today we would consider that to be, of course, 2.2 AA. But if you're working on this and maybe you've been working in this for a while, but you haven't designed a policy, you may well still have some properties that are 2.1 AA, but this policy then may state when they'll be upgraded to cover those additional success criteria. For any work that you're in progress on or that you plan to do in the future, you want to put those timelines in so that it's stated what the expectation is to what that baseline of conformance is, which ties directly to that conformance level. I think we all know that actually achieving full WCAG conformance is a very difficult prospect for many organizations. And so you seek to figure out what that baseline is and then how you may improve upon it. From the UsableNet perspective, we look at it as being that you want to have all of your, what we would call high severity issues solved, which are all of the issues that might be a blocker for someone using assistive technology or someone who is of low vision or has the need to use only keyboard navigation, making sure that there are no blockers in your digital properties. And then also we would look to remove all of the automated issues as well, so that you have another level of conformance there. And those become some of the easier ones to actually track and manage because you can use any of the automated scan platforms that are out there like UsableNet's Aqua to know 100% that those are solved because the scan itself would tell you. You need to look at how the conformance is tracked. We certainly recommend having a routine cadence of audits at least once a year, perhaps more if you're doing redesign work or bringing in new components. You also want to have a routine cadence of testing by members of the disabled community, someone using screen readers, someone who's using, who has to use keyboard navigation, someone who may have cognitive disabilities, so that you understand those users and how they would be working with the site. And then all of the things that you would do from sprint to sprint and from release to release to make sure that your conformance is to the appropriate level. You also need to know how you're going to report that information. What kind of reports are you going to get from whatever platform that you're using? Who needs to see those reports? Do they go to certain stakeholders? Are they sent to legal and compliance? It's important to understand, how those reports need to be stored and also shared out. And then there's making sure that there's access available to subject matter experts. This could be people who are internal to your organization. We highly recommend and have done previous webinars on setting up accessibility centers of excellence within your organization so that there is a hub of this information available. And it's that kind of organization, or the center of excellence rather, who might help also to build this accessibility policy and make sure it stays up to date as things evolve within the organization. You also want to cover things like the expectations for conformance while you're in remediation, and then once the desired baseline of conformance is reached. So during that remediation period, there could be expectations laid out on how much accessibility work is done within each sprint, especially for a site that may be audited for the very first time and going through its first batch of remediations. And then also looking at, once you get to that desired baseline, if you get to that high severity is solved, automation is solved, then what's the baseline? What's the expectation for each new release, for each sprint? How's it being tested to make sure your conformance stays where the expectation is? That's where the ongoing conformance comes as well. So you'll definitely set up monitoring. You'll definitely put QA processes in. You'll put definitions of done in place for your design team, for your developers, for your content creators, to make sure they're all thinking accessibility first and what their expectations are. And I mentioned vendors earlier as well, and the policy can distinctly be a place to have a section about your vendors, whether there are vendors who are providing you with development work, design work, QA work, or those third-party vendors who might be giving you components to put into the site. And then you may put additional sections in here as well. You could cover sections, for example, about email communications and the expectations for those, social media considerations, and what you're going to do on each platform to ensure your posts are accessible. So there's a number of different sections that can slide in here if needed. And it's about more than just being a document is too. Having this policy is really just the beginning of everything. It's about accountability. It's about setting up KPIs for the digital properties and the teams who are working on them to make sure that they know what's expected and what their accountability is to it and how the teams may be impacted if maybe something isn't done right. Does this end up, as consideration for performance reviews and things like that? It's very important as well that this policy is a living document, so it's reviewed and updated. Being able to say, these properties now meet our baseline. These properties are next up in the queue. These properties are going to be slid back for some reason because another priority has come in for a different site to get perhaps audited first. So there should be regular intervals. We recommend at least every 6 months for that. But if you're doing a lot of work across a lot of teams, it could even be longer than that. And this really becomes the centerpiece for a sustainable accessibility program and really informs any changes to the software development lifecycle, impacting those definitions of done, as I mentioned earlier, so that you have, everything in account and everybody knows what that expectation is, because that's really key. If you just say something like, well, accessibility is everybody's responsibility and just, essentially go off and do it, that can be confusing. So having it documented gives everybody the opportunity to be on the same page and know what that is. And that's really kind of the beginning of having everybody moving in lockstep on accessibility. Is there anything you would add to all that, Michele, before we get into statements?
Yeah. There is actually one point that probably could be a good bridge towards the statement conversation, and also towards the a little bit deeper dive on what happens in Europe. So finally, in 4 days, also Europe will have an accessibility act effective. I think that there are a few aspects that are particularly interesting that are part of the European Accessibility Act. Beside the being quite detailed and specific in terms of the technical digital accessibility, which is obviously very welcome because provides a very clear requirement in what needs to be done. The European Accessibility Act puts on the same level of importance the company maturity around the implementation of an accessibility program. So this means that the European Accessibility Act recommends and requires, I would say, companies to build the evidence of all the changes they operated on processes, on investment they made, in order to guarantee that accessibility is treated as a requirement and not as a one-off project that is done just because of the legal threat. I think this is quite interesting and definitely emphasizing the importance of uh, building and keeping an accessibility policy. I don't know, Jeff, if you have anything to add on top of this.
Yeah, I think the reference you made to maturity is really important across the board. It's certainly becoming, of course, more important in Europe as they now have these very set rules. But even if you think about how Title II, is rolling out in 2026 in the US, having these kind of documents available to show the programs that you have, while not specifically mentioned in Title II, can certainly help build the case if you're selling into a government entity who is going to hold you to Title II. You've got this additional documentation to show that it's not just a one-off, that you do have an ongoing program in place. So I think there's connections all around there.
Well said, Jeff.
And with that, I will hand it off to you to talk about statements.
Yeah, thank you. So yeah, let's see what are the requirements related to this statement. First of all, the statement is a public-facing document that communicates to your visitors what you are doing for accessibility. And the second, but probably is the main, let's say, priority of the statement, is providing to your visitors ways to contact you in case they are having issues with the site accessibility. The best practices, let's say the de facto standard, requires the link to the accessibility statement be present on every page. And normally, you can find the link to the statement in the footer of all pages. And in some cases, the statement could be required as part of the local regulations. And this statement may also have a specific template to follow. So we'll make a distinction, as I was alluding before, between the statement in the United States and the statement in Europe. So in the United States, the structure of the statement is pretty linear and clean. So it should include the company that owns the website or the native app, the URL or the name of the app, which is the web content accessibility level of the site is aiming to conform to, and the explanation of the efforts that have been done in order to conform to that level. In this case, normally the narrative that should be part of the statement should emphasize the kind of activities that are done. For example, the involvement of an expert that demonstrates that there are there is a third party, there is a partner that is a recognized expert in the accessibility space that conducts the audit or supports the company in the accessibility program. All the activities are done in order to monitor the production accessibility level. Everything that can provide an evidence of the program that's being implemented makes sense, and it is a strong, robust program, instead of just being a one-off project like I do an audit once a year. I remediate the results of the audit in a month, and then I forget accessibility for another 11 months. So we should try to build a paragraph that tells a story that makes sense, like I said before, providing the evidence that we are committed to make an investment on accessibility. I'm not just talking about investment in terms of dollar amounts. I'm talking about investment in terms of I'm open to change the ways I'm working in the name of accessibility, because I know that is a requirement as important as security. So the third bullet is just a bullet in this slide, but actually it's probably a little bit more elaborating than this. And then, as I said before, probably the number one priority for this statement is to provide your customers a way to get in touch with you. Normally is recommended to provide both a phone number and an email address. Sometimes providing both could be complicated from a logistic point of view, and at least an email address or an accessible form to fill in order to provide feedback and request for assistance could be recommended. Providing contact information is not just providing an email and a phone number on a website page. It means, and obviously creates the expectation that there will be somebody that reads the emails and replies to these emails, or answer that phone number, and answer the phone number understanding which are the requirements of or the needs of the user calling or sending the email. In our experience, we have seen clients of ours that were in an excellent spot in terms of technical accessibility, but due to the lack of preparation of their customer care, they exposed themselves a lot to the legal threat, because the plaintiff was calling their support team and they were not able to provide assistance. They were not able to understand the needs of the user. So that was highlighting the gap I was talking about before. So maybe the site technically in that period was at a very good level of accessibility, but the company didn't have a accessibility culture, didn't think about accessibility as a global requirement for the entire organization. Jeff, anything you want to add?
Yeah, just a couple of things I'd add there. I think you've highlighted well the importance of being able to have education for your customer care team about the expectations if you do get a call from someone who is in the disabled community, who may or may not identify themselves as such to them, but to be able to set up some processes so that you're taking in their information, you're taking in, getting them what they need to accomplish on the site, and organizing follow-up, because you're right, that can come back in claims if they're made. The other thing I'll touch on briefly too is what you mentioned about the accessible contact form. If you're not just putting in an email address, not only do you want the form to be accessible, you want how they get to that form to be accessible. I've been working with a couple of our partners recently on making sure things are relatively streamlined, because there could be a lot of stop points along the way. Like maybe you want to go to the FAQ, or maybe you're trying to go over here. A lot of things between the customer and that contact form. And where your accessibility statement's concerned, you don't want a lot of friction there, because if someone's trying to contact you because they're having an accessibility issue, you don't want to make it more difficult for them to reach out to you and get the help that they need. So really think about that kind of thing as you're deciding what to link up to from your contact, from the contact portion of your accessibility statement.
Thank you, Jeff. Excellent points. So moving forward, in this slide, we provide a sample for the accessibility statement. It doesn't make a lot of sense to invest time going through it, also because we would like to leave some room for questions. So I guess that you can either take a screenshot or probably you will get a copy of this deck. So you have the example here, but as I said, follows the pretty much the structure of what could be considered the simplest sample for a US accessibility statement. So what happens in Europe? Europe, I mean, the European Commission decided to make things a little bit more elaborated, more structured. And so the accessibility statement should start with an introduction that is the description of the company, so company name, company commitment, company statement. Often in Europe, we see digital accessibility come very close to the sustainability. So like being part of the ethical program of the company. So often the two messages are combined in the introduction of the accessibility statement in Europe. The description of the website, or I mean, when we talk about website, let's consider also that this applies to native apps. So I'm not going to repeat both every time. So a description of the site and the accessibility measure has been taken. The detailed description of which are all the efforts to maintain accessibility. So testing, monitoring, the training for all departments, the involvement of the disabled community in the testing, the collection of user feedback, and any other updates that can be provided in order to describe the way accessibility is implemented and maintained. Then it is required to mention the conformance status, in particular the Web Content Accessibility Guideline level and the EN 301-549 conformance. This code could be worry somebody, but actually it's just the name of the technical guideline associated to the European Accessibility Act, and reflects, for what concerns a website, it mirrors completely the Web Content Accessibility Guideline in its level 2.1 AA. There is already a draft version that will be published soon that mirrors the 2.2 AA. So it is basically the same, which is also the confirmation, and probably we have already treated that into another webinar, that from a technical point of view, US and Europe have the same requirements. So nothing new, nothing more to do necessarily from a technical point of view in Europe. Also, the accessibility statement needs to list all the limitation. So in case it is impossible to guarantee accessibility on specific areas of the site, elements, components, they need to be listed. And also inform the users in case alternatives are available. Alternatives means alternative ways to access the same information. If applicable, the European Accessibility Act allows to list in the statement the reason why something is not accessible because of disproportionate burden. Typically, this applies only in few specific scenarios. The most relevant one is in case of archived content. Imagine that you have a website that collects a lot of PDF documents, maybe because of any policy, you need to keep these documents for years and years. So maybe you can say that all documents before 2020 might not be accessible, and that would be accepted. They are considered an archive. If they are documents that are not supposed to change, most likely already replaced by newer versions. So the older ones could be could be let not accessible. So that is what disproportionate burden refers to. Then there are the interesting things. So together with the content information, so customers can reach out to report the issues. The European Accessibility Act requires also to mention which are the authority. Normally in Europe, there is a government authority that is responsible to regulate accessibility. So you need to mention the statement, which is the government authority. The customer can address complaints in case, after trying to contact the customer, there was no answer or the problem is not being resolved. So in the statement, you have to provide sort of escalation mechanism for the customer to activate. Consider that this is the sort of recommendation. It's not clear if it is a strong requirement or a recommendation. Is written in the European Accessibility Act as the expectations that should be that defines the structure of an accessibility statement. We have seen this applied in many different ways by companies. So somebody is following very precisely this template. Some others are clients are, or companies are providing statements that are a little bit more generic. But for sure, what cannot be missed is, again, the contact information. Consider that in Europe, there are some countries that might require specific templates to be followed because of a local regulatory. Jeff, can you go to the next slide? Yeah, thanks. So here you have few examples. Again, we don't need to see the specifics. You have the examples that you can check offline, but are three examples that are quite significant in our opinion. If you go to the next slide. Perfect. So, like I said, the European Accessibility Act has been created to represent a sort of legal floor, so harmonize all existing accessibility laws present in Europe. But like I said, there may be countries that have different templates or different regulatory that forces you to follow a specific template for this statement. This is because the European Accessibility Act allows the member states to create restrictive requirements. So you can create requirements that are softer or lighter than the European Accessibility Act, but you can create more restrictive requirements. And the typical more restrictive requirements is related to the accessibility statement. Two examples on top of my head are Italy and France. In Italy, the government authority required a specific template where you also have to list all the non-conformances that are present on your website. In France, together with the list of non-conformances, is also required to mention the quality of the experience based on the user needs. So how is the experience for a blind user, for a low vision user, for a motor disabled user? So you can understand that producing this accessibility statement could become quite time consuming and also complicated. So this is kind of the landscape around Europe. Jeff, anything to add on top of what I said?
I think that the driving force here behind accessibility statements is work with your counsel on these. Of course, Michele and I, neither of us are attorneys. Everything we're saying here is our interpretation of the laws that are out there, our experience in this space. But when you get down to the public statement that you're putting out, whether it's in the US or around the world, anywhere you're doing it, to work with your local council to understand exactly what you need to do. Michele highlighted a couple things around Italy and around France. Some countries like those, there's part of the regulation has to do with how much turnover and business a company is doing inside the country. So you may have an obligation, for example, in one country, but not another to, put up a certain kind of statement. And it's important to know that you're meeting the regulations and at the same time servicing your customers well. So I think it's really important to get as much information as you can from people who work in those countries to know what you have to do there so that you're putting up the right thing for each individual place.
Well said, Jeff.
I think the other thing I'll say on statements too, and I should have mentioned this when we were looking at the US one, I've seen from at time to time with partners that we work with that there's a hesitation to put up a statement that says what they're doing because they fear that that might actually bring more attention to them if they try to say that they're working to meet WCAG 2.2 and somebody finds an area where they're not meeting it. I would say, and again, I'm not an attorney and not providing legal advice, that you really need to rethink that because what I see in claims coming through is that if there is no accessibility statement, it in fact is called out in the claim itself. And then in every case that I've seen, in terms of settlements that happen, there's always a requirement to add a statement. So I don't think you're doing yourself or your customers any favors if you're choosing to not put a statement up to say that you are working on this and that it is part of the things that you're working towards on the website to hit that conformance level.
Yeah, and with this, Jeff, I think that you already answered one of the questions that we got, so which is good. On top of that, I would also like to add one thing, right? So we have been working in this slice of the market for so much time and for so many years that we have seen how the perception also from a legal point of view changed. So if 10, 15 years ago, the importance was the conformance, so the pure data, the pure numbers, my site is 100% conformance or is not accessible. How many errors do I have on the website? Those were the important aspects also of our relationship with the client. Now we have seen that the trajectory actually leans towards a different way to conceptualize accessibility. Yeah, numbers are still important, but telling that you are working on in a way that can convince who reads your statement. So actually, if your statement says, I have no idea what accessibility is, and I know I'm exaggerating this moment, and I've never worked on accessibility, I'll start in a month. Obviously, nobody will put that in a statement. That could be considered a legal downside or a way to to attract attention. But in case you're positioning things like we made the investment, so we are working on it. We know what are the requirements. We might not be perfect, but as websites have functional bugs, there might be accessibility bugs. The concept of accessibility bugs means I know what I need to do. I might have mistakes, but I know what I have to do. I have my team trained. I have my processes already changed to contemplate accessibility as part of my core value, my core requirements, my definition of done. It is a different story than being the position in the situation where you don't know that you had to do things, which maybe was the first time that you start working on accessibility. So the recommendation is to try to craft a language in the statement that provides that sense, that communicates that you are in control of accessibility. You might not be perfect, but you are in control. You have mechanisms to help your customers in case they need. And then obviously there needs to be some evidence also from a technical point of view.
Yeah, well said. And now we're into our Q&A section.
Thank you. That was fantastic. I really enjoyed the presentation. We have some questions waiting for you. So, first one, has anyone, I'm putting it in the chat too, has anyone else encountered reluctance from organizational stakeholders when discussing publishing an accessibility plan? I have encountered concern related to not wanting to lock in expectations when the process of remediation is ongoing.
Yeah, I've absolutely seen that quite a few times with some of the organizations I work with. And it's one of the key reasons that the policy is a living document and something that should be revisited. I said at least every 6 months, but certainly if you're in deep in a remediation, you may revise it quarterly. It becomes part of that thing like you would update any particular timeline document, I think, that would be out in your organization for how the remediation's going, or how redesign work goes. I think all of us who've ever been involved in a website redesign know that timeline gets updated a lot because it never quite goes like you want it to. So I think the reluctance towards creating a plan in that instance needs to be revisited, because you've got to have something that says this is what our expectation for the accessibility work is, because it's probably not a project on its own. It's probably something that's put into your sprints almost as a maintenance thing, because you're really fixing bugs along the way, unless you're having to do some type of hardcore redevelopment of something. But usually it's just, you're fixing some bugs to be taken care of. So it works into those maintenance areas. So I think if that comes up, it really has to be revisited as to why that's the hesitation, since that part of the policy really is something that would get updated as a project plan would almost, specifically in that area.
Thank
I
you.
I would like to add one thing, and my preamble is that at the beginning I will be a little bit controversial, so be prepared. I think that this is in particular because of the last part of this question. So when the process of remediation is ongoing, actually is the reason why this reluctancy actually might be a meaningful and almost a good reluctancy. The remediation the remediation moment is crucial for an organization, and also you consider the stakeholder role to determine how you will manage accessibility going forward. The remediation is not just resolving the issues that an expert highlighted. The remediation is understanding how your organization will have to deal with the requirements that is definitely not easy, such as accessibility. Remediation means understanding which are your competencies gap, which are your process gaps, which are the roles that should be involved in fixing, but more importantly, maintain accessibility, which are all the aspects that should go on the policy. So we need to fight against the reluctancy in building the policy, but I think that we should manage and get the positive, let's say, manage positively the reluctancy on, let's say, building a policy before the remediation is done. The learning process of remediation is, and let's say, the result of the remediation, the effect of the remediation is both on the website and the company maturity on understanding and learning how to manage accessibility.
Thank you. I've already put the next question into the chat. In regard to an internal policy and guideline, I feel that it would be appropriate to advocate for low-hanging level AAA fruit, such as WCAG SC 2.4.10. Section heading. Just curious to hear if and how anyone else has tried to implement WCAG level AAA based guidelines for content creation and how that has been received. How can we as accessibility professionals push beyond basic compliance to go beyond good enough?
It's a great question. And honestly, it's something that I look at as being part of like the maturity of an organization. I think you have to get them to take care of the basics first, solve those high severity issues, solve those automated issues that sit within AA. And then I think you could start having the conversation about AAA. It's already such a challenge to give organizations the sense of not being overwhelmed by the vast number of things they may get in like their initial audits. Because it can take, in my experience, to really hit some levels of conformance for some organizations, 18 months to 2 years to even start to feel good about their baseline across, especially if they have multiple sites, that I'm hesitant to start to introduce AAA and higher conformance levels before they're there, before they can meet base conformance, before they've got a good program of working with individuals in the disabled community on user testing and feedback and that kind of thing. But I think it's a great thing to look at, to introduce if an organization is really going well in their program and in their work, to start to introduce that next level of material so they can improve their accessibility and go beyond.
Thank you. And I always say that with CAG, including AAA, is minimum compliant. I have proven again and again to audiences that when I post AAA or AA stuff, people are like, that's not a good experience. Exactly. You need to go beyond. Thank you. Next question. Could there be a legal downside to highlighting what you are still working on and is not yet acceptable? Could that make you a target for a lawsuit since you're admitting part of the product is not yet acceptable?
This particular question came in just as we were talking about policy. But I think it does actually speak to both the policy and the statement, as Michele also talked about in the statement section. So I think from the policy standpoint, I mean, you do have an option, I think, with your policy to only talk about the parts that you're working on and the things that you're remediating currently or have, been remediated and now meet your baseline level. But at the end of the day, I think if you're omitting something, let's say you're an organization that has 6 websites and your policy happens to only talk about 3, I think not having it present and accounted for somehow is pretty equal to, having it in there and it being in a section saying we're remediating these at this time. Because you're going to get it's a call out either way, present or not. I do think for the policy, it's not immediately a document that you're making publicly facing. It is really meant for internal, and I mentioned those instances when it could become publicly facing, especially if it benefits you in working to prove you've got a program or in working with vendors. You could potentially have, and this again is a place I would talk to your counsel about, the true internal version of your policy and the true external version of your policy, if your organization feels there's a reason to separate those in any way. From the statement standpoint, I think we covered pretty well the idea that you really need to have a statement there, even if you're in early days, so that you've got contact information present. And so it's at least known that you're working on it. Because again, if you don't have it, that can be a different kind of flag to say, hey, here's somebody who has no program at all. We should look at that more closely.
Okay, thank you. Next question. Do you have any recommendations for documenting a university procurement accessibility policy? I've seen some universities have separate IT accessibility and procurement accessibility policies, and some have just one accessibility policy that addresses everything. Could you please provide insight on this for universities making decisions to update policy, especially to conform with ADA Title II update? And the question can also apply to companies as well. So
Yeah, I absolutely think it does because the broader policies, of course, get into things like, physical space and how you're doing all of that. I think, in my opinion, and I have not worked a lot in this space, but my feeling is that really needs to be two policies. I think digital accessibility should be in your broader accessibility policy as you're talking about, anything around physical space or anything else that might be baked into the broader university slash organizational policy. And then another document that does lay out the digital policies on their own. Because if you're working, let's say, with a vendor who's building your website, they don't necessarily need to know and wade through everything about your physical space accessibility. They need and will benefit from getting this specific policy on what they need to do to meet your digital accessibility needs. So I think it belongs well in both of them. And perhaps the individual digital accessibility policy might be longer and more detailed than what's in the full policy. And maybe those two things linked together. But that's where I'd go with that.
Thank you. And also be aware of that if you have both in one place, which is a good idea, try to page them out. So, because people get overwhelmed with really long documents, so keep that in mind as well. All right, next question. I thought archived content was just not in scope of the EAA. This disproportionate burden would be something that would apply if a product or service requires fundamental alteration of its basic nature in order to comply.
Yeah, thanks for the question. I was definitely not precise before. So the example was a website that is classified as a service in the European Accessibility Act, including an area of this service where documents, all documents were available. So the examples that were also listed in the questions are part of the let's say the section of the European Accessibility Act that is related to the exemptions and exceptions. So yes, you are right. The disproportionate burden applies to the alteration of the nature of the service or the let's say the risk of affecting the business of the company if focusing on accessibility. The reality also, I mean, in that we have discussed in conversation with our legal partners in Europe that given the status of technology and given the experience that they brought to the table in this conversation, it's quite complicated to convince about the size of investment putting at risk an organization, in particular as the European Accessibility Act applies to companies that are not that small. So it's always very tricky to try to leverage the disproportional burden. So my example was more finalized to a specific, very specific scenario. But yeah, in general, it applies when the effort is too much and completely alter the nature of the product.
Thank you. And I'm sorry we can't get to any more questions, but both speakers have shared their email addresses, so feel free to follow up with them. Thank you so much for attending today's webinar. We have upcoming IAAP webinar June 30th, an inclusive forum, making PDFs accessible. That's always a challenge. July 8th, from accommodation to inclusion, leveraging technology to build truly inclusive workplaces. August 6th, creating inclusive and ADA compliant digital geographic text maps. August 19th, accessibility in emerging economies. Did you enjoy this webinar? Are you not a member? Join over 7,500 allied professionals in over 100 countries. Become a member and get complimentary access to live professional education, webinars, and our library of archived webinars, free courses, networking platform, and more. Sign up at accessibilityassociation.org or email info@accessibilityassociation.org to see how you can become an IAAP member. Thank you again. Have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thanks, everyone.